well. Let's check. Dr. Langler.
Hello.
Can you see and hear us?
Yeah.
Да, благодарю вас. PhD, международный...
PhD, International Society of Logotherapy and Existential Analysis, Austria. Thank you for your feedback. Now we will take our technical break number 2, also for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Технический перерыв.
The technical break number 2 is over. Since we had some sound issues, we apologize for those. Let us resume the session of the Dissertation Council for the defense of thesis by Grigorieva, Alexandrina for the degree of Doctor of Psychological Sciences, specialty 19004, medical psychology, on the theme the concept of psychoprophylaxis of autoaggressive behavior adolescents. By the order of Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University, Guniotov Alexander Valentinovich, dated the 13th of May 2021, number 4812, me, Zishurinsk Alexander, Doctor of Psychology, Associate Professor, Department of Pedagogy and Educational Psychology, was appointed Chairman of the Dissertation Council. Other members of the Council were appointed in the same order. Let me introduce them to you. Grigorieva Irina Alexeyevna, Doctor of Psychology, Head of the Department of Psychosomatics and Psychotherapy, St. Petersburg State Pediatric Medical University. Slobodchikov Ilya Mikhailovich, Doctor of Psychology, Principal Researcher of Institute of Artistic Education and Cultural Studies, Russian Academy of Education. In the remote access mode, today we have Rozanov Vsevolod Anatolovich, Doctor of Medicine, Professor of the Department of Health Psychology and Deviant Behavior of St. Petersburg University. Can you see and hear us, Vsevolod Anatolovich? Yes, good afternoon again, dear colleagues. Yes, I can see and hear you very well. Yes, Vsevolod Anatolovich, thank you. The answer is positive. Alfred Langler, PhD, International Society of Logotherapy and Existential Analysis, Austria. Dr. Langler, can you hear and see us?
Yes, I can see and hear.
Yes. Thank you.
The answer is positive. Also, at this session, the academic advisor is present, Doctor of Psychology, Head of Laboratory of Psychohygiene and Psychoprophylaxis of Sobsky National Medical Research Center for Psychiatry and Addiction Medicine, Buligina Vera Gennadievna. Let me also inform you that our session is being recorded and broadcast online at St. Petersburg University website. The speeches are being simultaneously translated from Russian into English and from English into Russian. During the broadcast, an email is currently displayed to which all the listeners may send their questions to the applicant and express their opinion regarding the content of the thesis and take part in the ongoing scientific discussion. These questions shall be forwarded to me by our technical support department, and I shall present them during the discussion. These questions should be related to the applicant's speech, her thesis. It's necessary to include the name, position, and place of employment of the author. Questions that are not related to the scientific discussion of the thesis and assessment of its content, as well as anonymous questions, shall not be presented. According to the order of awarding academic degrees of Candidate of Sciences and Doctor of Sciences at St. Petersburg University, approved by the local regulations, a session of the Dissertation Council shall be considered competent if at least 2/3 of the appointed members are present, but not less than 4 persons. Our council consists of 5 persons. All 5 are present. Audio-visual contact has been established with 2 members working in the remote mode. Thus, we have the quorum. Let me set forth the following procedure of today's Dissertation Council session. Approximate duration of 2 hours. Summary report of the chairman on the applicant and documents submitted and their compliance with applicable regulations. Approximately 5 minutes. Summary report of the applicant outlining the key findings of the study. Approximately 20 minutes. Questions to the applicant strictly on her report, not more than 2 questions per each question. Answers of the applicant, not more than 5 minutes for all questions. Speeches of all members of the Dissertation Council in turn, with their assessment of the thesis and the applicant's speech, as well as questions and suggestions to the applicant, approximately 10 minutes for each speaker. Speech of the chairman with his assessment of the thesis. Answers of the degree applicant to questions and remarks of the Dissertation Council members, not more than 20 minutes. 8. Open discussion. Speeches at will of the attendees with summaries of their opinions and specific questions and suggestions to the applicant strictly on the subject of the research. No more than 2 minutes for each speaker. At that, all these speakers are kindly requested to register themselves and fully introduce themselves before speaking. Presentation of questions to the applicant received during the discussion of a speech and in the course of the ongoing scientific discussion during the live broadcast. Let me inform you that written question, the presentation of which takes over 2 minutes, shall not be presented. Answers of the applicant, no more than 2 minutes for each question. 11. Speech of the academic advisor, not more than 3 minutes, please. 12. Discussion of the Dissertation Council members of the defense results. For that period, sound shall be switched off approximately 5 minutes. Open individual voting. Votes shall be counted by the chairman and results shall be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. Making decision on awarding or non-awarding degree to the applicant. 15. Closing remarks of the applicant. Please, not more than 2 minutes. Dear colleagues, do you have any questions or objections to this procedure? Thank you. If you have no objections, let's start our session. First of all, please switch the sound off of your mobile phones. Dear colleagues working in the remote mode, please keep your phones switched on in case there's a technical emergency so that we could reach you. Thank you for your understanding. Let's start our session. Summary report of the chairman. Let me inform you that the thesis by Grigorieva Alexandrina Andreevna for degree of Doctor of Psychological Sciences, Scientific Specialty 190004 Medical Psychology on the theme the concept on psychoprophylaxis of autoaggressive behavior of adolescents was accepted for defense by the Order of Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University on the 23rd of March 2021, number 2183/1. Grigorieva Alexandrina Andreevna wrote her thesis at National Medical Research Center of Psychiatry and Substance Addiction under supervision of Doctor of Psychology, head of the Laboratory of Psychohygiene and Psychoprophylaxis of Sobsky National Medical Center for Psychiatry and Addiction Medicine, Buligina Vera Gennadievna. The number of publications of the applicant which set forth the main scientific results of the thesis according to the enclosed list is 25. In peer-reviewed journals from the list approved by the Ministry of Science and Education of Russia, 25 publications. In journals indexed in scientific databases, Web of Science and Scopus, no publications. The applicant submitted to the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University a full set of documents to accept the thesis for consideration and defense. All the documents comply with Article 12 of Section 3 of the Order. All the documents, according to the information I received from the curator, comply with requirements and are kept in the applicant's attestation file. Copies are available from the Dissertation Council Committee Support Officer, who is now present in person of the curator. Before I give the floor to the applicant, I have a question to the Dissertation Council member. Dear Council members, is it necessary? Do you have any general questions to the applicant? And is it necessary to disclose the entire list of submitted documents? I think there's no need for that. We know all. So you are familiar with all the documents. I see. Then let's give the floor to the applicant for her summary report. Please remember you have 20 minutes for your report. Alexandrina Andreevna, the floor is yours. Dear Council members, dear guests, let me present to you a report for the defense of my thesis on the topic, the concept psychoprophylaxis of autoaggressive behavior, adolescent existential and analytical aspect. The social importance of the problem is determined by the fact that according to WHO, Russia ranks third among the countries in terms of teenage suicides. Despite a decrease in this indicator between 2015 and 2019, the situation remains tense. Over 4,000 suicide attempts were recorded. 14% were completed suicides. In addition, last year there was a 7% increase in the number of adolescents resorting to substance use. Many theoretical and empirical studies, including questions about direct and indirect types of aggression, have been devoted to the study of characteristics and mechanisms of autoaggressive behavior. The existential approach and its methodology in the prevention of adolescent autoaggression, however, has not received sufficient attention. Common understanding of autoaggressive behavior does not sufficiently take into account the significant role of the teenager existential experience, leading to the conscious or unconscious decision to die. This subject area is only represented in a handful of studies. Analysis of statistical data and the degree of development of the problem of prevention of autoaggressive behavior determined the purpose of my research. Development and justification of person-oriented concept of prevention of autoaggressive behavior based on highlighted existential mechanisms. Objectives of the research are shown in this slide, so let me not dwell on them. They will be announced during my report. In order to develop a concept, including a structural and functional model, principles and procedures for psychoprophylactic activity, we analyze current foreign models of teenage autoaggressive behavior and their prevention. We took into account development and content of the general concepts and specific ones relating to adolescence, the empirical validity of models, and methodology and content of psychotherapeutic interventions. The next stage of the theoretical analysis was the study of existing approach and programs of prevention in schools, since school-based prevention strategies are globally recognized as highly effective. The dominant approach is cognitive behavioral. Group forms and methods of work are actively used. The focus is on primary prevention. Appropriateness of considering the existential methodology as the basis of prevention of autoaggressive behavior among teenagers in comprehensive schools is also confirmed by the lack of sustainable positive results in prevention, as well as by data showing that the use of psychoeducation approach increases the risk of completed suicide among teenagers. The existential approach has its own terminological apparatus. The main concept and are shown in this slide: existence, fundamental existential motivations and its components, existential and anxiety, a personal behavior. We analyzed and related the provisions of age psychology and existential approach to the adolescent crisis. In general and age-specific psychology, adolescent crisis is seen as an evolutionary state of ontogenesis during which the subject's social situation changes and the leading type of activity and reference groups change. Autoaggressive behavior is interpreted as a consequence of disorders in the emotional, volitional sphere. The author's proposed concept of psychoprophylaxis of autoaggressive behavior deals with the existential aspect of teenage crisis, which is understood as a period of decision-making and taking responsibility for your own lives, together with the increase of normal age-related existential anxiety. Aggressive behavior is seen as a consequence of frustration, of striving to realize fundamental existential motivations. The adult is important to the personal development during that period because it enables the adolescent to assume a personal position in relation to themselves and the environment. The structure of the adolescent crisis has been developed, describes three main components: existential quest, existential factors, risk, protective factors, position taken, which determines the outcome of the crisis. Two options for the outcome of adolescents' existential crisis were a positive outcome. Adolescents develop a positive picture of their future. Life is perceived as good. They trust in themselves and the power of I. The negative outcome is when an inconsistent system of values and a personal behavior is formed. The adolescent acts under the influence of patterns and stereotypes learned from outside, whether relating to his or her feelings and opinion. Life is subjectively experienced as not good. Difficulties in forming the life strategy may cause the development of depression, autoaggressive behavior, and addictions. This understanding of the content of existential crisis of teenagers and variants of outcomes became the basis of the concept of psychoprophylaxis of autoaggressive behavior, including structure and functional model, a set of principles, and the order of psychoprophylactic work. In brief, they are summarized as follows. The prevention of autoaggressive behavior among teenagers should include a stage of identified teenagers with a tendency to and at risk of autoaggression, as well as carrying practical measures. The task of primary prevention is to strengthen protective factors through actualization of personal resources corresponding to the full fundamental existential motivation. Targets of secondary prevention are formed on the basis of identified violations of the fundamental motivations of the individual, realized in individual work. The main existential areas of prevention work are helping adolescents to access their existential circumstances, individual conditions and possibilities, to overcome difficulties that arise, to find themselves, their ability to separate themselves from the world and other people, an objective attitude towards themselves, and to form life goals and find meanings. Thus, the theoretical analysis of the problem and the development of ideas about the existential adolescent crisis allowed us to put forward the first scientific proposition. The implementation of psychological concept of prevention of teenage autoaggressive behavior based on the understanding of the existential adolescent crisis and its negative outcome includes a cultural and functional model, a set of principles, psychodiagnostic tools, a psychological correction program, and personified prevention methods, which allow taking into account the modality of the existential crisis, including individual features and significant experiences of the teenager. All subsequent stages of the thesis were devoted to empirical confirmation of the concept. The second stage of the study was aimed at assessing specific features of interrelations between the indicators of different forms of autoaggressive behavior, self-harming, suicidal, risky, and substance use, and psychological characteristics in teenagers with high risk of autoaggression. A psychodiagnostic survey of adolescents in Chekhov district was carried out. The total number was 2,023, of whom 1,010 were boys with an average was 14 years old. The methods used were aimed at studying the socio-demographic and psychological characteristics, identifying risks of suicidal, self-injurious, risky behaviors, psychoactive substance use. To study age-specific features of such behavior, adolescents were divided into three groups: 10, 11, 12, 15, and 16, 18 years old. The suicide risk indicators was found to have the highest value in the 12-15 age group. The index of body modifications and self-harm had significant differences with a combination of both age and gender characteristics. The values of the indicator positive attitude towards body modifications are significantly higher in adolescent girls compared to boys. The positive attitude towards self-harm predominate between the ages of 16 and 18, both gender groups. Adolescent girls differ significantly in their active interest in substance use. Risk-taking behavior is most pronounced between the ages of 16 and 18 and is not specific to either group of boys or girls. On the basis of four risk groups with prevalence of suicidal, self-harm, and risk behavior in substance were formed based on the results of the screening, which included 22% of teenagers. Each risk group was divided into those with tendency towards autoaggressive and high risk of autoaggressive behavior. The socio-demographic characteristics of those surveys were then analyzed. A group at risk of self-harm was characterized by increased conflicts. The group at risk of suicide had the highest percentage of parents using psychoactive substances and the highest percentage of domestic violence. Correlation analysis was done to study the features of structure of interrelations between autoaggressive behavior and psychological characteristics. The results were used to build a structure chart for each of the risk groups. The main risk component was identified as the main component. It was revealed that in the group at risk of suicidal behavior, the degree of risk expression was significantly connected with dysfunctional beliefs. In adolescents at risk of self-harming behavior, it was found to be associated with decreased volitional self-regulation. For adolescents at risk of substance use, an increase of suicide risk is accompanied by an increase in self-mastery, a decrease in impulsivity and dysfunctional beliefs, and the formation of a negative attitude towards self-harm. In the group of adolescents with risky behavior, with a decrease of indicators of volitional self-regulation, the number of dysfunctional beliefs. The results of the second stage of the study resulted in the second scientific proposition. Suicidal, self-harming, risky behavior and substance use differ by gender, age, and socio-psychological characteristics. Differences in the structure of the relationship between the level of suicide risk in teenagers of different types of autoaggressive behavior are determined by correlation between the indicators on dysfunctional beliefs and impulsivity. The third stage of the study was aimed at determining specifics of existential awareness in adolescents with autoaggressive behavior and existential mechanisms of autoaggression. A total of 96 teenagers with objectively confirmed autoaggression and 186 teenagers with a tendency towards this kind of behavior and 86 persons with normal behavior. The diagnostic package included methods to verify findings of autoaggressive risks and methods to examine the existential awareness, assessment of features of existential consciousness in a group of teenagers with confirmed autoaggressive behavior. Tendency to autoaggression and normative behavior revealed that teenagers with autoaggressive behavior differ by low indicators of security level, sense of time, sense of recognition by the society of their value, inclusion in the social interconnections. A study of the value sphere revealed that adolescents with autoaggressive behavior had lower scores on individual values such as the ability to manage other people and resources in the sense of security. Entropic analysis was used to examine stability and dissimilarity of parameters in norm and autoaggressive groups. The lowest entropy of parameters was observed in the group of those with autoaggressive behavior. The highest correlation was determined with factors of the third and fourth indicators corresponding to the experience of authenticity and meaning of life. The difficulties of authenticity and lack of meaning lead teenagers to autoaggressive behavior and deviation of life. The next stage was a study of existential mechanisms of autoaggressive behavior. Two factors were singled out in a group of examinees with autoaggressive behavior. The first factor was ability to cope with life, resilience, involvement, control, integral index of resilience, and indices 1, 3, and 4 are the fundamental existential motivations, including the index of existential fulfillment. The second factor was social success, which included a combination of variables from the individual's value structure, conformity, non-safety, tradition, achievement, which suggests that adolescent autoaggressive behavior is formed under the influence of increasing experience of I can cope with life and myself, as well as the devaluation, the role of social success and stability under the dominance of rules and norms accepted in the group significant to them. As the outcome of third stage, the third scientific proposition dealing with norm-aging existential tasks in autoaggressive adolescents is marked by the development of a specific system of individual values that reflect a decline in the importance of safety and social status, and characterized by a high degree of connectedness to all components of existential awareness. In view of the fact that in clinical practice this is linked with depressive symptoms, the fourth stage of the empirical study was dedicated to the study of specific features of depressive symptomology in teenagers with autoaggressive behavior, as well as discovery of interrelation between depression and existential characteristics. This was done using a child depression test, as well as methods designed to examine the existential indicators. To determine the qualitative and quantitative features of relationship between components of fundamental existential motivations and structure of depressive symptoms, a comparison was made of the specific weight of intercorrelational relations in adolescents with group autoaggressive behavior and tendency towards autoaggression. We found that in the group of with autoaggressive behavior, that index of the first fundamental safety, had the greatest specific weight in the structure of depression system. The average specific weight of fundamental motivation components was higher than the group with a tendency. In the group with tendency to autoaggression, the component with a high specific weight to investigate the structure of the relationship between values and depressive symptoms, we use the method of structural psychological analysis. The most stable correlation structure is characterized by youth and autoaggressive behavior. There is a less stable in those with autoaggressive tendencies, signs of disintegration. The next step in the empirical analysis was to isolate the relationship between measures of resilience and symptoms of depression. It was found that for those with autoaggressive behavior, an increase in severity of depression was associated with only a portion of resilience component, whereas in youth with autoaggressive tendency, an increase in depression symptoms was associated with a decrease in the integral index of resilience and all its components. This suggests that building resilience may be important in the primary prevention of autoaggressive behavior because it reduces the likelihood of depression and therefore the risk of autoaggressive behaviors. Implementation of the fourth stage of the study allowed us to formulate the following proposition. The structural relations between symptoms of depression, existential awareness components are qualitatively and quantitatively different among youths with autoaggressive behavior and tendency towards autoaggression. Depression symptoms in adolescents with autoaggressive tendencies are related with the experience of insecurity and devaluation of safety. In adolescents with autoaggressive tendencies, increased depression associated with decreational resilience. The next stage of the work was devoted to the development and testing of a set of programs of primary and secondary prevention of autoaggressive behavior with subsequent check of the effectiveness. 50 adolescents took part in primary prevention. A total of 72 teenagers took part in the secondary prevention programs. The content and the main methods of prevention interventions corresponded to the topics of the four fundamental motivations. Measurement of primary prevention effectiveness included differences in existential and resilience indicators before and after 3 months in the program. Significant improvements in ability to experience emotional closeness in interaction with others. Increased sense of worth of one's, increased basic trusts that the world and ability to cope with challenges of existential constants consistent with the first fundamental motivation were found. As a result of the secondary prevention interventions, an improvement in attitudes towards participation in the program and a decrease in the frequency of self-harm was found. Self-harm was observed in 23% of adolescents 3 months after the completion of the program. The frequency of self-harm decreased by 58%, and no change in behavior was observed in 19%. Thus, a positive dynamic was observed in 81% of the participants. To evaluate the quality of intervention, a prognostic model of change in the frequency of self-harm among adolescents after completing the personalized program was constructed using the Markov analysis method, which confirmed statistical significance, the reduction of autoaggressive behavior, and the principles of all participants. The next stage of LT effectiveness, secondary prevention, was to study changes in resilience before and after the program. There was an increase in the indicators of relatedness, interested attention, and value in the future. There was significant increase in the third fundamental existential motivation, authenticity, and as well as in the overall index of existential fulfillment, an increase in the overall resilience. In the control group with autoaggressive behavior, they didn't participate in the program. Statistically significant differences in the dynamics of the exertion were identified only for the first reliance indicator. The analysis of effectiveness of the author's primary and secondary prophylaxis allows us to make our fifth scientific proposition. The application of personified approach in primary prevention leads to an increase in some indices of fundamental existential motivation and resilience. In secondary and tertiary prevention, a change in the nature of existential experience, an increase in the overall level of life and resilience. The final stage of the study was devoted to the development and substantiation of practical recommendations concerning the implementation of the personified approach in the prevention of autoaggressive behavior in general educational institutions, the content of which is reflected in the educational manual, methodological recommendations, programs of additional professional training. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Alexandrina Andreevna. I have a question to the Dissertation Council members. Do you have any questions on your report that we have just heard? Welcome, Ilya Mikhailovich. Yeah, now you can hear me. I have a question about in your presentation you mentioned an interest about entropy analysis. Could you explain this analysis in a little bit more detail? And let me follow up, because let me explain why I'm asking this question, because the previous statement, at least for me, we will talk about it later. Before but this remark was connected with the existential crisis. I have a feeling that this entropy analysis is, so I would like to know the peculiarities, exactly what that is. Thank you for your question. According to the entropy analysis, we were able to see the connection between the elements or lack of such organization. And what we saw is that normative behavior in teenagers all the components of motivation, their motivations are quite isolated. The entropy of these parameters is quite high, and thus we can explain that the normative behavior is connected with the fact that these components are not related to each other, whereas in teenagers with autoaggressive behavior, entropy is lower. These elements occur more often, and we see more often the combination of the third and fourth existential motivations related to authenticity and the meaning of life. It seems that teenagers are rely more on these existential structures. I agree, thank you. Okay, let's save the rest of my questions till discussion. Let's see. Dear council members, do you have any more questions? Vsevolod Anatolovich, please. Please turn the sound on. Alexandrina Andreevna, am I right in hearing you said that the program of school prevention may increase the risk of suicidal behavior? Am I right? Or maybe I misheard. School prevention program may increase the primary prevention may increase the risk of primary screening, may increase the risk of suicidal behavior. I think here probably that when we analyzed data on efficiency of various programs, we identified such effects that some prevention programs based on psychoeducational approach indeed increased the risk. I'm talking really about suicidal behavior. Yes, it was really so. Thank you. And maybe next, what do you think? What is the reason for that? On the basis of your study, in the framework of your study. Thank you for this question. In my opinion, here we provide an instruction to the teenagers. So how do we discuss these issues with teenagers? How do we inform them? That's why here the existential analysis, the conversations about the value of life, they are much more appropriate. We should not indicate teenagers what to do if they have symptoms, but talk about more significant things that mark such behavior. So we should avoid actualization. May I ask a question? The last 10 years I've been involved in psychotraumatology, and this in the US and our European colleagues. There is such a concept as trauma factor in the analysis of this contradictory system of values and dysfunctional beliefs. Is there any specific or prevailing trauma factor? Can you comment on this crucial thing? Something is pushing our teenagers to such experiences and to such actions. Thank you for this question. If we talk about traumatic factors, when we studied families of these teenagers, maybe one of the most significant factors is the use of psychoactive substances, the use of substance use of the parents. So it has an impact on the teenage behavior in the future. And in teenagers with suicidal behavior, the most common, the fact of suicide in the family was the most common factor. So these are the factors that promote suicide of whom? Suicide in the family. In the family, one of the parents who committed suicide. So transgeneration aspect. So this psychological traumas, which are mostly connected with parents and children relations, and what the parents proclaim such self-destructive behavior. Thank you. And from the practical point and from the point of counseling, your work, have you deliberately analyzed what teenagers say? What interesting from the practical and scientific point have you found? Thank you. One of the quotes which I remember best is that when one boy, 14-year-old boy, dying is fashionable today. So maybe that's something that struck me most. And living is scary. You need to work hard to live. Well, dear colleagues, who else has questions? Dr. Langler, maybe you have a question, please.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to get a summary of the main important elements for prevention. There are so many elements you spoke about. Could you make a summary, give us a summary, what helps teenagers most to prevent suicidal behavior or tendencies towards suicidal behavior?
Thank you very much for your question. Using the existential analysis terminology, personal meetings work best. I'm talking about a meeting of an adult with a teenager. I think this is the key element of prevention, and I think the role of an adult with his resources, his opportunities, his ability to personally relate as an example, become an example, role model, this factor is underestimated in prevention measures. I see.
Thank you very
much.
I would like to clarify something. You said that you said that you had suicide history in the family. So what's primary, genetic, biological factor or psychological factor in your opinion, according to your results? Thank you very much. In my opinion, and I think most researchers would agree with me, that all these factors have some influence together. But we may work in because if our task is psychoprophylaxis, we should be guided by psychoprophylaxis principles and principles of prevention, which are just as important as other factors such as biological, etc. Dear colleagues, do we still have any questions? Do council members still have any questions? Then let us, I suggest we proceed to speeches of the Dissertation Council with their assessment of the thesis and of the applicant's speech with questions and suggestions to the applicant, and external reviews, if any. I suggest, if you don't mind, dear colleagues, after each review, let's give the floor to the applicant to answer questions and comments, provide her comments. Do you have any objections to this procedure? No, we are fine. Thank you. Then let's let the applicant answer right away, all questions right away. And have we received any external reviews? No, we have not received any external reviews, so let's give the floor to the Dissertation Council members. Let me inform you that these reviews were published at St. Petersburg University website, and it was possible to examine them beforehand. So I suggest the reviewers focus on the key points and certainly critical remarks and questions. Do council members have any objections? No, thank you. Okay, the presentation of reviews. Please, Vsevolod Anatolyevich, may I ask you to present your review? Would you like to start with my review? Yes, please. Are you okay with that? Yes, I am. Thank you. I'll be happy to do that. I understand I have 10 minutes, right? So I'll have been very seldom so enthusiastic for a long time. First of all, because the topic is extremely relevant, and for me, it's very close to me. And the work of Alexandrina Andreevna, maybe I was not familiar, because she is mostly in journals on psychology. But let me emphasize that she emphasized that out of all age groups among adolescents, children below the age of 18, we don't see any decrease in the number of suicides. Out of 4,000 attempts, 14% completed suicide. That's approximately 500 or maybe 700 die every year. So this task is very important. And the fact that the applicant focused, first of all, on these existential aspects, I think is another important factor, a positive, a strong point of her work, because we all know about different psychological prevention programs, primary prevention, based on the primary prevention approach, and the reports are different. Some reports claim that such programs are very efficient. One of the programs mentioned, and some are Sailor, is for example, but in generally speaking, they don't solve the problem. They aim to reach a vast audience of teenagers. These are run at schools, and no special attention to problems of inner experiences in teenagers, the meaning of life, of their tasks and goals, these tasks are not addressed. So I'd like to say that the applicant took up the most complex part of this issue, and because of that, and that is certainly an advantage of her work. As for how she dealt with this task, I think her approach was very efficient. I like the study design. Everything is very well balanced and cleverly planned. The study involved 2,000 persons, which were later put into small groups, where considering various control groups, the author assesses the influence of different factors. I read literature review very carefully. It's very interesting. It's very well written, especially the chapter on analysis of these approaches. And I would like to draw the attention that of all the works, about approximately 90% are foreign works. Though there are many studies like that in Russia, they are seldom published and seldom analyzed. And while there are few serious studies that assess the efficiency of such programs, the number of suicides among teenagers, but so we should try to achieve that. So in general, my assessment is positive. The tasks, ambitious tasks, the author set herself and taken up the most difficult sphere. All tasks have been solved using clinical psychology approaches. She identified such problems, how to talk with teenagers considering these existential moments. So from that point, I don't have any critical remarks, but I see a number of points which I think are questions to the applicant, and I have some critical remarks as well. As for questions I have some questions about terminology. The author used the term personified or personalized programs. How would the author comment on the term personality-oriented? Because this term seems to be more well balanced. Personalized means that you're talking personally to the person. Personality-oriented is different. I think that would be interesting. As for terminology, another point. You talk a lot about primary, secondary, and tertiary prophylaxis. And we're not talking not only about suicide behavior or autoaggressive, self-harming behavior. There's a different that makes the work. So these factors often overlap. So it's necessary to keep analyzing different factors. So in literature overview, it's very well done. But talking about primary, secondary, when in suicide studies they explained primary, this reaching towards the population, secondary prevention, these are risk groups, and tertiary prevention is reaching survivors. So what's your attitude to that? And the next question that seemed very interesting to me, the author devoted lots of attention to inner world of teenagers. All their models, all their schemes are based on figuring out what's happening in this inner world and how to reach these meanings. But in my opinion, there is no external component of the pressure of which the teenagers can feel. I mean, contemporary mass media, social networks, social platforms that devaluate any meaningful existence and deprive life of any meaning. So even in the models, there's no room for that. So I would like to hear what the author thinks about, in this sense, what can we offer? What are the ideas? Because you see, many these things personified, they will be destroyed by this flood of information, and very often philosophers are often part of that. Those proclaim lack of meaning in life. So what do we do with that? This is a question. This, of course, is a philosophical question, but it would be interesting to hear what the author thinks about that. And another thing, the assistance model lacks the model of peer assistance. So the idea is to talk with teenagers, but teenagers also talk to each other, and often they don't want to listen to adults. So maybe it would be better to teach them some peer assistance methods. The results obtained by the author very valuable when she analyzed personal psychopathological manifestations in children, and in girls it's always worse. It looks worse. So why is that, according to the author? Is it they are more prone to influences, or is it that we see more pronounced tendency to express, to inform the researcher of their problems, to answer questions asked? And some minor issues I will drop because we don't have any time. As for critical remarks, I have some. Very often you keep comparing three groups. Traditionally, this is discriminational analysis, and so why are you using this approach? And correlation data, the work would be better if they were presented in correlograms, because in the attempt to understand what's happening is quite the material is too massive. Too many interesting ideas, the idea how everything was done, not just developed, but first she developed a concept. That's a very deep, profound idea. So first the author created the philosophical foundation, and then she linked it to reality, to practice. But in the tables where she's talk to these and these subjects, existential, but how do we talk? So you want to teach people to maintain these contacts. I think it's not, maybe you could comment on that, how do you teach those who take up responsibility to talk from these positions? So what topics, for example, if we take up simpler programs, we can use role plays, for example. And so let's talk about stress, let's talk about depression, let's talk about this and that. And this is more or less clear. But in your complexity, how do we talk to teenagers? What's your idea of that? So that's all. But also I think that though I mentioned all the problems, I have to say that my enthusiasm is still there. I think, we are witnessing the arrival of a powerful researcher who is using the very powerful idea, because we can talk about prevention, but if a child has no vision of the future, if the child does not understand why it's happening, the results will not be good. So my conclusion is very positive, and I will certainly support this work and vote for it. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Всеволод Anatolyevich. May I clarify for conclusions? Am I right in thinking that the thesis complies to the regulations? Yes, yes, if you like, I can read that part, so please. So the thesis by Grigorieva, I think the thesis by Grigorieva, Alexandrina, Andreevna, concept of psychoprophylaxis of autoaggressive behavior, existential analytical aspect, is a full-scale study which produced new theoretical and practical results. The thesis complies to the key regulations set by the Order on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and the degree applicant Grigorieva Alexandrina deserves being awarded the degree of Doctor of Psychology, specialty 190004, medical psychology, and she has not violated any articles or complied with all the norms. Всеволод Anatolyevich, thank you very much for such a detailed scientific review, and let us give the floor to our applicant, Alexandrina Andreevna. Please answer questions. Thank you very much for such a detailed review. I will try to answer all the questions and remark. The first question about the term personalized the term personified indeed in national is individual oriented, but we're talking about personalized and not personality oriented. So let me clarify each term. Individualization is understood as a system of educational, and the personality oriented approach maintains in development of his individuality, and personified approach is and oriented towards internal activity of the to manifest his qualities in accordance with his desire to manifest his qualities, to act in accordance with his interests, views, worldviews, relating to conditions of the outside world, to achieve meaningful goals and meanings in life. Interpreting the term persona, the emphasis is placed on the spiritual dimension. An important part of the personified approach is the formation of a personal act. And while the individual approach can be taken at any stage of a child's development, person-oriented and person-centered approach are most relevant for teenagers. Second, what is meant by tertiary prevention? Tertiary prevention, in my book, focuses on individuals with persistent maladaptive behaviors, those who attempted suicide or have addictive behaviors associated with self-harm or substance use. The objective of tertiary prevention is to assist the individual in social and psychological adaptation after medical interventions, to carry out activities aimed at strengthening the individual, to monitor the current psychological state, to implement timely crisis intervention, to prevent the possible recurrence of autoaggressive acts. As there were few such adolescents, the focus was more on secondary prevention in adolescents with suicidal thoughts and intentions, evidence of non-suicidal self-harm, occasional substance use, or risky behavior consisted the largest group of subjects. Next, the question about the reasons and factors of our personal thinking and social-induced influence and impact of social media on teenagers. Undoubtedly, many problems in adolescence are social-induced. Social media, messengers, and constant access to the internet became an integral part of their adolescent lives. Their content being broadcast is often destructive. All of this does not affect formation of a personal behavior in which the individual makes no effort to be himself or herself, acts under the influence of templates and stereotypes, both from society and from various internet resources, without relating to his or her feelings, opinions, and attitudes. And in Figure 5 presents the structure of existential crisis. including risk factors, as well as existential given that adolescents face. These categories comprise totality of stresses, including the influence of society and of the internet. The prevention programs take these influences into account. It's also important to develop the ability to adopt their own personal attitudes and values in order to deal critically with negative social stimuli and to avoid patterned copying behavior is often proposed on the internet. Next, there was a question on altruistic motives and helping others on meaningful existential experiences. Altruistic motives do influence meaningful and existential experiences. Helping others and developing the ability to emphasize and relate to others in the framework of the proposed concept is included as component 2 of the fundamental motivation, relations with others, and is also presented in specific methods of preventive influence. Thus, the method of developing an emotional response is aimed at helping to express their feelings towards others and to develop the ability to express empathy. The personified model of interaction contains conditions for formation of adolescent self-transcendence, the realization of the inactivity aimed at active changes in the outside world, and one of the forms of such activity is altruism. Next, there was a question on the content of conversation with a teenage and specific methodological tips. Yes, it's shown in the methodological recommendations: technology for implementation, personalized prevention of self-harming behavior, a training manual for professionals, in a monograph existential approach in prevention of aggressive behavior among adolescents, as well. In one of the tables presents the main thematic headings: primary prevention, and the content of these interventions relates to the fundamental existential motivations and is the aim of such. Each session includes dialogue with adolescent on a particular topic, including modeling the situation, developing personal attitude towards, and referring to their own experiences, thoughts within the group process. If we're talking about primary prevention, in such sessions, adolescents are offered to examples of other people's experiences and behavior, and each of the group sessions is described in our program. The content is presented in the monograph Existential Approach to Prevention of Autoaggressive Behavior. And in secondary and tertiary prevention, the sessions are Socratic dialogue between a specialist and an adolescent using integrative existential therapy and existential analysis. The sixth question is why teenage girls had worse mental health indicators. Indeed, that's a difficult question, and my answer is this: to some degree, deterioration in the girl's mental health can be linked to a greater willingness to acknowledge their sometimes this hypertrophied perception of situational difficulties that lead to such emotional cascade of negative thoughts and feelings. And because of that, girls' great emotional ability, as well as importance of such existential themes as relations with other people and with their own bodies, also contribute to the mental health indicators. Next, there was a comment on better use discrimination of postdoc analysis compared with chi-squared discriminant analysis used to identify predictors that contribute most to assignment to a particular group. This analysis can be used on two or more groups. Postdoc analysis is the equivalent of t-test. In this method, different validity criteria are applied when comparing variance of quantitative data in two or more groups. the choice in favor of a chi-square criterion. So when analyzing differences in frequency, distribution of certain nominal traits in several groups, in this way, the significance of difference occurrence has been. Next, there was a comment on cross-correlograms and the type of sessions conducted with teenagers. Indeed, I have to agree that representation of data as cross-correlograms would allow the complex picture of the correlations presented to be captured visually. And as for the program, I think I already said is that using the methodology aimed at primary prevention, there is a group sessions, and secondary and tertiary prevention include dialogue with on specific topics, modern situations, etc. And in sessions, during these sessions, group sessions, teenagers are offered carefully selected content with examples of experience and behavior of other people. Next, there was a comment on how to teach professionals. As teaching professionals, we developed and approved a program of professional training for psychologists and educationalists, clinical psychology in technology of personalized prevention of self-harming behavior that included 144 academic hours. So that's quite a big problem. Classes are aimed at exploring the theoretical knowledge and acquiring practical skills to improve and expand professional competencies in prevention of autoaggressive behavior. And the program includes topics such as identifying the main signs of self-harming suicidal behavior in adolescents, specifics of psychodiagnosis and practical foundations of personalized prevention. And in the course of this program, specific practical cases are discussed. So we discuss practical models, strategies, but I agree that teaching this method is not easy, and within the framework of this program, we include the basics of existential analysis, understanding of terminology, and the basics of this approach. Thank you, Alexandrina. Vsevolod Andreevich, are you satisfied with the answers and comments of the applicant? Yes, dear Chairman, I am quite satisfied. Very broad and well-grounded response. Thank you. Now let me give the floor to Grigorieva Irina Alexeyevna. Irina Alexeyevna, welcome. Dear Alexandrina Andreevna, dear Council members, let me present my review. The relevance is beyond doubt. These programs were created a long time ago, and we all know that after some years, Polskaya defended her thesis, which on self-destructive behavior, which is very close. And there are many such works, national and international. Many works are dedicated, and all propose programs, but efficiency is not that good. So the topic is relevant, and there should be different approaches. And because of that, let me proceed to novelty. Novelty is in accordance to the best traditions, primary and secondary personalized prevention, psychological interventions that become the basis of a regional concept of personality-oriented prevention of suicidal and self-harming behavior. Especially, I would like to mention the system for assessment of efficiency of the program, and also the program of prevention of autoaggressive behavior adapted to be used in schools. I think that's very important because most work is in schools and not all the teenagers seek professional assistance, but most teenagers attend schools, and the outreach would be very high. As for also to Novelty, as these programs were created in view of existential problems which we did not discuss. We mostly genetic our approach, one of the main approaches, at least in St. Petersburg for many years. But here the program is based on the existential crisis of teenagers, and here, because of that, one of the main tasks is restoration of basic existential values of a personality. And here also about them talking about the mechanisms of autoaggressive behavior of teenagers, on which I won't dwell. The evaluation of traditions on this basis. So the author touches upon these themes. So practical significance, let me mention already. There were we heard some questions and answers, and the author also published a manual, practical manual for professionals at schools for implementation of the proposed work algorithm for teenagers with various forms of autoaggressive behavior. As for the author has a sufficient number of publications, the structure is traditional and complies with the. Let me proceed to questions. As for comments, it would be desirable to pay more attention to the relations between the existential consciousness and autoaggressive behavior and clinical characteristics of their psychological health, psychiatric mental health. And now questions. What surprised me, your selection is very big. You examined 2023, of which 455 were included in the risk group of autoaggressive behavior. You've spoken to teenagers in general schools, in ordinary schools, and only 553 only included in the control groups without any signs of autoaggressive behavior. So please comment on that. Second, please interpret the fact of that girls are more interested in substance use, positive attitude to body modifications, higher risk of suicidal behavior compared against low indicators of self-regulation, persistence, a high level of dysfunctional settings. Such data, according in most works, the picture is the opposite. This is more typical in young men than in boys. So how your data agree with most national and international studies, or maybe they contradict the studies and they reflect recent changes in the society that made changes, account for such changes. Number 3, could you please clarify the existential analytical aspect in your concept of psychoprophylaxis, autoaggressive behavior in teenagers? And question 4, how many personified programs that can be used and you tested in secondary schools, and what do they have in common, and what is different? How are they different? Thank you. Thank you, Irina Alexeyevna. Can you make a conclusion? Oh, I beg your pardon. Yes. The conclusion, the thesis on concept of psychoprophylaxis, autoaggressive behavior in teenagers, existential analytical aspect, is a full-scale study that produced new theoretical and practical significant results. The thesis complies with the main requirements set by the order on the 1st of September 2016, number 6821/1, on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. And the degree applicant, Grigorieva Alexandrina, deserves awarding degree of Doctor of Psychology, specialty 190004, Medical Psychology. Article 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated. Thank you. Alexandrina Andreevna, can you please make your answers shorter? Maybe like 3 or 4 minutes, please. Irina Alexeyevna, let me thank you for your work. Irina Alexeyevna, let me thank you for your work and for your review, for your feedback. Let me answer your questions. First question about the size of risk groups and control group about size of aggressive behavior. Determining the criteria for formation of the norm group of 553 persons, we were guided by the results of psychodiagnostic survey, according to which the adolescents in this group did not score a single point on any of the techniques aimed at identifying autoaggressive behavior. The remaining adolescents either fell into the tendency group with unconfirmed evidence of autoaggressive behavior, or both did not reach critical. This agrees with the results of other studies. The risk groups show that 7 to 21% are exposed to autoaggressive behavior. Second question about interpretation of the fact that girls are more interested in substance use, have a positive attitude towards body modifications, increased risk of suicidal behavior compared to boys against a background of low indicators of volitional self-regulation and persistence, high levels of impulsivity. This girls' greater interest in substance use, positive attitude towards body modifications, great risk of suicidal behavior compared to boys against a background of low levels of self-regulation, perseverance, high levels of impulsivity, and dysfunctional attitudes are consistent with the majority of similar domestic and foreign studies. A number of studies have shown that in gender-specific behavior and suicidal self-harm, gender specificity is Polska, Palozha, Metinak. Between 10 to 20% of girls have a history of suicide attempt, and indeed, suicidal behavior is more common in girls, and in boys is a risk. There are a number of completed attempts. Girls are more prone to suicidal behavior. Also, studies indicate that in 2021, the number of suicide attempts among teenagers and self-harming behavior in girls increased, and some researchers say it increased by 25% in last year, but 25% this indicator increased. So such gender specificity is there, it was described by some authors, and in our study we obtained similar results. The third question was about existential analytical aspect in the proposed concept of prophylaxis. The proposed concept of prophylaxis is based on concept of personality developed within the framework of existential humanistic trend, and in particular the modern existential analysis of Alfred Langler. Central to this is the question of the meaning and values of human life, spiritual dimension of human existence in the world, and the notion of fundamental existential motivations in striving to experience life as good. This adolescent autoaggression arising from the experience of existential crisis. The existential methodology is used for development differentiated prevention models in the context of 4 fundamental motivations and the idea of the outcome of the adolescent existential crisis. And finally, the question on the number of programs we developed as a result of our study, and general and private aspects. Let me answer this. So we developed a program of primary prevention as well as a manual oriented at formation of individual personalized programs for each teenager, as well as a program aimed at educating professionals working with such teenagers. Common aspects of programs implemented include identification of prevention measures at-risk groups, group format of interventions, and is attention to specific to individual teenagers, his life history and emerging outlook, and the emphasis on primary and secondary and tertiary prevention, which is not getting enough attention in the general education system. Thank you. Inna Alexeyevna, are you satisfied with the answers to your questions and comments? Yes, thank you, I am. Thank you, dear colleagues, and let's move on. Let's give the floor to Slaborchikov Ilya Mikhailovich. Thank you. I will try to make it really short, and please have a seat, dear lady. In my practice, and I've been doing this for over 15 years, it's the first case when I deliberately did not include a single critical remark and they didn't ask a single question. I did that not because I think this thesis is ideal, but because, in my opinion, it's the first work which, in principle, takes a different look at teenage age and prevention concept. I consider this is sufficient to award doctor's degree, which I will announce separately. I very well understand the questions asked by my colleagues, and I understand the answers, the possible answers, but I think this is the case when I fully and absolutely support our respected applicant, because as was said, I am absolutely convinced that the history, what Irina Alexeyevna just asked, the story of gender situation, it's exactly the way Alexandrina Andreevna has described it, and not what we normally see in our basic literature. So, and with your permission, I will just read one paragraph of my review and will proceed to the formal part. Studying the space of adolescence, very few researchers in existential experiences, and these few researchers, which include the author, certainly take a considerable step forward compared to all the others. And in my opinion, the fact that the existential crisis is put in the center, the concept that was discussed very seldom, and as I understand, never, the age structure was never described before, with some minor exceptions. For example, of Dmitry Leontiev, and I have also touched upon this on teenage loneliness and some other works. I think that's a great omission that Alexandrina Andreevna has taken up this approach. In addition to values, beyond any doubt, it lifts her thesis above all similar works. And I will limit myself to this statement, and the formal conclusion is that this scientific paper is an independent, complete study, has scientific value and novelty, theoretical and practical significance, makes a significant contribution to several spheres of psychological theory and practice and educational clinical activities. The thesis by Grigorieva, Alexandrina Andreevna on the theme concept of psychoprophylaxis, autoaggressive behavior in teenagers, the existential analytical aspect, corresponds to the main requirements set by the order of the ministry, and the degree applicant, Grigorieva, deserves awarding the degree of Doctor of Psychology, specialty 190004, Medical Psychology, Psychological Sciences. Articles 9 and 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated. Professor, Doctor, and so on. Thank you. Let me thank you, Ilya Mikhailovich. Then we can proceed and give the floor to the next review, and I would like to give the floor to Dr. Alfred Langler, please.
Thank you. I'm impressed by those colleagues of the committee who spoke before me, of their distinguished and differentiated review of the work, and good questions and the good answers by Alexandrina. I can make it short because I think we really went into depth of this work already. I want to highlight first the attempt which Alexandrina made, which marks for me an attempt which brings along a change of culture in the understanding of autoaggressive behavior, in understanding of youth in general, and in the future ways of prevention of these harming and painful and very suffering experiences which many young people undergo. So this is a very humanistic view which puts into the center the individual person and tries to do justice to the individuality and the need and difficulties the individuals have in the specific age of adolescence in dealing with the world, with all these seductions and pressures and claims, and at the same time in dealing with themselves, going through puberty, becoming adults, and not knowing themselves well enough, especially when they are not well encountered by adults, which seems to be the most effective preventive factor in Alexandrina's investigation. So I must say I'm really very not only impressed by the huge work which the author did, practically, theoretically, practically, and the good results which she developed out of the data to come to a practical application of her findings and to help to change some culture, some practices which are applied so far. I also want to, so this is for me really the great impact of this work, and this cannot be underlined enough because it has an influence which has an international impact, I would say. And she did not shy away from doing so much work with so many young people to come to reliable data. And of course, it needs a lot of youngsters to have enough high-risk adolescents in the investigation. The author also did something respectable, which wasn't mentioned so far, but which I would like to mention to make the picture complete, that she gave a good overview of the theories and applications on the international level. She spoke about wrote about theoretical foundations and the specific characteristics of autoaggressive behavior, and devoted quite a time for theory and practical and empirical research on the international level. So this is really impressive. I have a question to the author because she brings the existential crisis, puts the existential crisis in the center of her theory, and combines it with the attestation of a desire to realize existence, which is in the young people. Practically speaking, I think we have no doubts that this is there. But my question is, how much empirical basis did you find for this desire? This desire to realize existence, to come to a fulfilling life, to develop by themselves, is logic. But did you get any data or qualitative results which support this central theorem in your thesis? To come to the formal concluding, I can read the statement, the dissertation of Grigorieva, Alexandrina, Andreevna on the concept of psychoprophylaxis of autoaggressive behavior of adolescents, existential analytical aspect, meets the basic requirements established by the order of 1st of September 2016, number 6821/1, on the procedure for awarding academic degrees in St. Petersburg State University to an applicant for fully deserved the award of the degree of Doctor of Psychological Sciences in the specialty 190004 Medical Psychology. Paragraphs 9 and 11 of the procedure are not violated by the dissertant. Thank you.
Спасибо, Альфред. Пожалуйста, Александрина Андреевна, можно ответить на поступивший вопрос.
Thank you very much for your review and for your work of reviewing my thesis. To answer your question, if I got empirical data to realize the existence with empirical data, in my opinion, the fact indicates that in adolescents with autoaggression, we observed reduction of certain psychological indicators, which demonstrates that autoaggressive situation, a teenager relies more on the need to find inner support and inner resources to continue to exist, to get more experiences. They don't like life. They don't want to live, to find meanings, to find values. And we obtained interesting data on in secondary prevention, when after the second measurement, after 3 months, in these teenagers, the indicators, the existential motivation increased, the integrity indicator increased, which means that indeed for such teenagers it's very important that by helping a teenager to overcome this existential crisis, his desire to experience life as good is very important. And in general, it's very important in making decision on future life. Yes, I choose life. I say yes or no to life. I'm looking at other options such as death, and to leave these sufferings, these experiences with which I cannot cope. Thank you. Thank you, Alexandrina Andreevna. Dr. Langler, are you satisfied, Alfred?
Thank you. Yes, I am.
Let's proceed to the next review. My review. Let me not read all of it. We have discussed today relevance of this work, validity of the results, and the author's construction guarantees its validity. The author has conducted a serious theoretical work of self-harming behavior against use of substances, proposed concept of psychological prevention and its model touch upon all the methodological aspects of prevention and validity of this work, of these results, is guaranteed not only methodological by the method, but by following the organizational and ethical principles which should be applied in medical psychology. The methodological complex includes complementary methods and tools, and indeed contains a great number of those, including questionnaires, testing, focus group, content analysis, expert assessment, and it corresponds very well to the goals of the study and the results obtained by the applicant. As for scientific novelty, let me just say that the author's concept of autoaggressive behavior, the author identifies the structure of existential crisis, and the option and autoaggressive behavior is seen as an outcome of frustration and an attempt to realize its basic motivations, and this is very relevant for teenagers. The scientific and theoretical significance of this study, as has already been mentioned by my colleagues, is obvious in the work on the empirical level. While the practical significance, as we can see, is beyond any doubt, and members of the council mentioned that the algorithm and the methods of personalized prophylaxis also take into account existential experiences, and the educational environment here there's nothing to comment. It's so relevant and there's so much in demand, and indeed in all the institutions there is some they're trying to identify students with manifestations of autoaggressive behavior or attempts such as incompleted suicide and completed suicides as well. We even have statistics in St. Petersburg for different regions where the number of completed suicides is higher. For example, Nevsky district of St. Petersburg is the leader, unfortunately. So these are problems we are facing every day, and in various media and parents and educational institutions and others professionals, and the fact that this work is in demand considering the social and economic situation in the world. I think your timing was very good, and everything you did in this work will be very much in demand among different specialists, and I recommend that you present it in a more accessible format for general population, and because we found that there is a lack of popular information on that. Let me proceed to questions. I have only one. In your prevention program, the author suggests special training for educators, psychologists, and social teachers working in education institutions aimed at increasing their professional competence. for identification of indicators of autoaggressive behavior. And in the context of methodology of personalized prophylaxis, description is made in terms of necessary competencies, but such competencies are not listed. So maybe you could comment on that and some questions. I only have two questions. First, what's the methodological explanation for determining the role of existential conscious in formation of psychological mechanisms of autoaggressive behavior? And second, what clinical psychological characteristics of teenagers prevails from the point of autoaggression, autoaggressive behavior? And the conclusion, which is similar to conclusion made the thesis on concept of psychoprophylaxis, autoaggressive behavior, existential analytical aspect, is a full-scale study which produced new theoretical and practically significant results, which opens new sphere in medical psychology. Existential analytical prophylaxis of autoaggressive behavior. The thesis corresponds to the main requirements set by the order on the 1st of September 2016, 6821/1, on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. And the degree applicant Grigorieva Alexandrina deserves awarding the degree of Doctor of Psychological Sciences, specialty 190004, Medical Psychology. Article 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated. Thank you. Will you please answer, Alexandrina Andreevna? Thank you very much for reviewing my work. As for your comment about the content of competencies of the program, indeed, I have not described competencies in detail because these are described in the program of personalized prevention of self-harming behavior, and in this program we included competencies that would improve competencies that include direct, indirect ways, concepts of primary, tertiary, and secondary prevention, main principles of personalized approach, etc. And in the course of this program, experts will individually devise individual programs aimed at prevention of autoaggression based on personalized approach, both in clinical practice and at schools. And the first question about methodological rationale for determining the role of existential awareness, let me say that the methodological basis for the role of existential awareness in the formation of psychological mechanisms of autoaggressive behavior in teenagers, I use the model of development existential anxiety of 4 fundamental existential of Alfred Langler and the formation of existential awareness of Schumacher. The formation of existential awareness involves the desire to cope with the conditions of life in the light of available opportunities and emerging experiences, maintaining the ability to stay oneself, realizing meaningful life goals and meanings, which determines the personal behavior. And the second question about clinical and psychological characteristics of adolescents with a tendency towards autoaggressive and autoaggressive behavior. In terms of tendency for autoaggressive behavior, the clinical and psychological characteristic corresponding to the depressive symptom complex can be regarded as a leading one, and we identified that increase in the risk of autoaggressive behavior is accompanied by an increase in depression symptoms, bad mood, feelings of low efficiency and productivity in learning activities. And adolescents with autoaggressive behavior, the level of depression corresponds to exceeding the critical test values. Thank you. Thank you. I'm satisfied with the answers. Well, dear colleagues, is anyone else willing to speak? Any of the attendees? Anyone who is not a member of the Dissertation Council? Is anyone willing to speak? Thank you. If we received any questions during our session, no, not. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, let's give the floor to the academic advisor. Dear Vera Gennadievna, please tell us about the applicant and her work and her research. Okay. Please use the microphone. Thank you. Can you hear me now? When I met Alexandrina Andreevna, she was already a mature professional who had the highest qualities as a person, competencies and professional competencies, special professional competencies, and her personality are well. And speaking of professional competencies, the basic quality is basic. Very good background training in clinical psychology, unique knowledge and understanding of the work of working with psychiatric and drug addicts, both adult and teenagers and children. Many years. One of the very good training, existential analysis and psychotherapy. And the work was already in progress. It was a pleasure to watch very quick progress of Alexandrina Andreevna as a researcher. Her ability to inspire the entire district, parents, educators, psychologists with the project, and humanistic idea which inspired and still inspires the author. And I think it seems to me that she is different from many other researchers. She's been very involved, very enthusiastic. She's very loyal, not only to her cause, but also to the children, to teenagers with whom she's been working. This is a very rare combination of early maturity and maintaining maximalistic views to obtaining optimal results, where she's trying to help each family and each teenager. Maybe such results, such scaly paper and work were possible because Alexandrina Andreevna doesn't have enough time to reflect on her significance. So on the one hand, I would like to wish her to become aware of her value as an individual and as a researcher, but on the other hand, we wouldn't be able to achieve such an excellent result otherwise. And meeting such students, such people, such therapists, such psychologists, such researchers enables me to keep my motivation to continue work, maintains meanings, and I'm very grateful to Alexandrina Andreevna for our for our cooperation. I hope that in the future, that our cooperation will continue. Thank you, Vera Gennadievna. Dear colleagues, is anyone else willing to speak among the any one of the council members or any of the attendees, any of the guests? If there are, have we received any questions by email? No. Thank you. Who else would like to say a couple of words about the thesis in the form of scientific discussion? So, okay, let's proceed to general discussion. Then, with your permission, not to take the floor anymore, let me say a couple of words. First of all, I am very grateful to the university for inviting me as an expert. For me, that was an honor, especially on such distinguished group of scientists, and I have a very definite feeling that in the context of everything we said and in the context of work we are discussing, that we are together, we are taking a very significant step forward towards new understanding of one of the most complex periods. I always suspected that we don't understand adolescence. Now I am absolutely convinced of that, and special thanks to the applicant. I took so many notes. I have so many ideas on development of certain nuances in the context of everything I heard. And special thanks to the colleagues, because I also heard something interesting from them. Thank you, Ilya Mikhailovich. Sevil Anatolyevich, Alfred, would you like to say something? A couple of words.
I'm very grateful to.
I would like to add something. I can add something to what I already said. I am also grateful to the academic advisor who drew our attention to what the applicant has done, and in this respect let me emphasize that we received this work from the leading psychiatric institution, and that is also important because the ability to talk to doctors, psychiatrists, as well as psychologists, and the applicant managed to do that. I read very carefully the list of her published papers. Of course, as formally, everything, all the magazines, of course, they are included in the list of the National Attestation Commission, but there are other journals where she could also, for example, Suicide Studies, unfortunately, the author. And in conclusion, let me say that I deliberately did not touch upon this, but when we want to reduce suicidal and self-harming manifestations in children and teenagers, we need approaches that would enable us to publish our works abroad. And that means randomized controlled studies. I know how difficult it is in social, psychological, and humanistic interventions, but it's doable, and it's very hard, it's hard work, and we need money for that. But unfortunately, and let me say that different attempts to get money from Russian scientific funds, usually we get negative responses. I don't know how lucky or how unlucky other colleagues are, but I think these foundations focus more on high-tech approaches and psychological social interventions of the type we are discussing. They could be more important, they're possibly more important to preserve life of children and teenagers. So maybe someone of the colleagues could communicate these ideas to decision makers in these spheres. And once again, thank you very much for such an enriching discussion, a very interesting work and a very interesting discussion. Thank you. Cyril Anatolyevich. Alfred, would you like to say something?
Just briefly, thank you, Alexandrina, for the stamina to make such a huge work, to bring together all these data which are so helpful to really declare and make visible what we need to come to better prevention and to better understanding of the adolescent. And this is an needs so much effort, it needs so much time consuming. And when we undergo and write a thesis and do the investigation, so many students suffer from desperate situations and lack of energy in between. But that you finished it and that you brought together all this is really a great contribution to our society. And thank you for this.
Thank you, Alfred. And maybe a couple of words about the prospects of this study, because indeed, when we talk about victimization and existential, it's all connected with a clinical problem. What can be studied in the concept of our Russian post-traumatic stress disorder, DSM-5, if we talk, there is a very clear indication that discussing clinical manifestation of post-traumatic stress disorder, psychological trauma, for the first time, everything was combined, and this gives us a very broad field for research in the sphere of medical psychology for our colleagues to study more actively all these issues connected with suicidal behavior, psychological traumas of teenagers, and I think the author will have an interesting aspect. This is digital variant of this problem, when all the information is obtained from social networks, when teenagers become members of all these groups, become immersed in these problems, and such cases have already been reported. I think all this digital era will result in a new aspect of study of the problem you have touched upon today, and it's a pleasure for me to see that this is not a study for the sake of study. This is a fundamental scientific work which enables to develop the problem in different spheres, and that is always very relevant, very valuable for Russian and international professional community. Thank you. I would, at that, let me ask Irina Alexeyevna. I will be very brief, and I wanted to emphasize two things. First, today the opinion is very positive, but let me remember the predecessors. Many researchers worked on primary Igumnov, Yaltonsky, Sirota, etc. So we shouldn't forget them. So today we saw a different aspect, so it's a different paradigm, and these works complement each other, and the wider the scope, the greater the effect. This is the first. And second, I said in my presentation, it was very rewarding that the model was presented it was a 3D model that made understanding your concept very easy for your presentation. So thank you. It was also very good. Thank you. Thank you, Irina Alexeyevna. Is anyone else willing to speak? Then, if our discussion is over and we are not getting any more questions, before we sum up and before we vote, let me ask the council members and the degree applicant, do council members and the applicant have any comments and remarks regarding the procedure, especially since we used the remote access mode? No, I don't have any questions. Thank you, colleagues. Then let's proceed to the next point. It's voting. And before that, those are not members of the Dissertation Council, we need a break to discuss our results. That will only take a couple of minutes, and after our... Do we need a break? No, we don't. We don't need a break. So please... Please switch the sound off. Sound on. Yes, it is. Yes, the sound is on. Let me inform you. Oh, so it has to be open voting. So we'll vote again. Once again, let us, after all the discussions, let's proceed to open voting. Well, let me ask in turn all the council members to express their opinion. Inform us if you are for or against Rozanov Vsevolod Anatolovich. Your opinion? I'm for. Grigorieva Irina Alexeyevna. Your opinion? I'm for. I'm for. Slobodchikov Ilya Mikhailovich. I'm for. Alfred Langler.
I'm for.
Thank you. And me, the chairman, Zishirinskaya Oksana Vladimirovna, my opinion is for. Thus, dear colleagues and guests, let me inform you that out of 5 council members, 5 voted for, Nobody voted against and nobody abstained. The decision to award to Grigorieva Alexandrina Andreevna the degree of Doctor of Psychology, specialty 19-0004 Medical Psychology, has been made. Dear applicant, the floor is yours for your closing remarks. Dear Chairman, dear Council members, let me use the opportunity and thank St. Petersburg University, the experts Zhrinska, Rozanov, Всеволод Anatolyevich Slobodchikov, Ilya Mikhailovich, Grigorieva Elena Alexeyevna, and Alfred Langler for their skilled and objective assessment and overall positive assessment of my thesis. This enabled us to understand the significance of our work and map prospects, better understanding the results. Also, I'd like to thank the National Research Center of Psychiatry and Serbsky, on the basis of which this work was written, as well as special gratitude to my academic advisor, Buligina Vera Gennadievna, for her valuable advice, for helping me in this work, for support and understanding, for excellent organization, and for personal support. I would like to thank experts of additional education and upbringing of Chekhov district, and educators and experts in social work in Chekhov. Together with them, we conducted such hard work. Also, let me thank all the attendees for their support and for being interested in my work. Thank you. We congratulate the applicant, and considering several technical breaks, I think our session today was on time, and we finished on time. I declare the session closed. Let me thank everybody. Please stop online broadcasting. Thank you.